Good evening. I'm Joshua Johnson. It's Tuesday, July 5th, and here's what we're talking about tonight. A man faces 7 charges of first-degree murder for allegedly attacking a holiday parade near Chicago. We'll have more on the investigation, including his online history. How might we use digital clues to prevent future attacks? Philadelphia's mayor is clearly fed up after a shooting on Independence Day.
There's not an event or a day where I don't lay on my back at night, look at the ceiling, and worry about stuff. I'll be happy when I'm not here, when I'm not mayor, and I can enjoy some stuff.
You're looking forward to not being mayor?
Yeah.
Also, a 10-year-old rape victim is denied an abortion in Ohio. An OBGYN gives us her view of abortion access there. And a special grand jury wants to talk to some of former President Trump's allies. We'll have more on the grand jury probe of election interference. We are learning more about the deadly mass shooting in a Chicago suburb yesterday. 7 people were killed, 46 were injured during the attack in Highland Park, that's north of Chicago. The suspect is in custody, and he now faces 7 charges of first-degree murder. Prosecutors say dozens more charges are coming. This evening, the Lake County Coroner's Office released the names of 6 of the victims. They are 64-year-old Catherine Goldstein, 35-year-old Irina McCarthy, 37-year-old Kevin McCarthy, 63-year-old Jacqueline Sundheim, 88-year-old Stephen Strauss, and 78-year-old Nicolas Toledo Zaragoza. Now, the shooting happened around 10 a.m. yesterday during Highland Park's 4th of July parade. Police say the suspect bought the firearms that were used in the attack legally. They also believe that he had been planning it for weeks. Highland Park's Mayor Nancy Rodering says that the suspect was raised in Highland Park. She says she was a Cub Scout pack leader and knew him as a Cub Scout.
It was a complete shock, given what I knew when he was a young boy. I've not been in touch with him for many, many years in between. It's devastating that he felt that he had the right to bring this kind of terror to his hometown.
Let's begin tonight with NBC's Dasha Burns, who joins us from Highland Park, Illinois. Dasha, what more do we know about how this attack came about? Have investigators given us any more information about the planning behind this attack?
Yeah, we learned a lot of information today, Joshua, but first let me just tell you, we are expecting now a visit from Vice President Kamala Harris. We know she is en route to Highland Park right now, so she could be here any moment, but we have learned a lot from multiple briefings today about how this was pre-planned. As you mentioned there, this is something that we are told by law enforcement officials the suspect had been planning for weeks. We learned that he was able to get onto the rooftop of a local business through an escape ladder, and he dressed in women's clothing. Law enforcement officials say they believe he did so in order to disguise himself so that he could more easily flee the scene. They believe that after he unleashed what they say was about 70 rounds of gunfire, he was able to blend into the crowd. He made his way to his mother's house, where he grabbed her car and drove it, we have learned, to Wisconsin and then back to Illinois. We don't know details on that journey yet, but he was apprehended by law enforcement. He is now in custody, and as of just the last hour or so, we've learned that he has been charged with 7 counts of murder, Joshua.
Dasha, as we mentioned, the death toll is up to 7 people. What more do we know about the victims, not only those who have died, but the ones who are still being treated?
Yeah, 7 who have died and 30 plus who have been injured, one of whom we know is a pediatric patient, a child. all of those individuals suffering gunshot wounds. We learned the names and the ages of the deceased earlier today. I will just go through and read them because, Joshua, look, at the end of the day, we have to remember this is about people. We have to cover this far too often, and every time it's so important to remember that these are members of a community, these are parents, these are grandparents, these are people's children. 64-year-old Catherine Goldstein of Highland Park, 35-year-old Irina McCarthy, also Highland Park, 37-year-old Kevin McCarthy, 63-year-old Jackie Sondheim of Highland Park, 88-year-old Stephen Strauss, 78-year-old Nicholas Toledo, a father and grandfather who was visiting here from Mexico. We know there are still people in the hospital recovering today. Just halfway through the day, we learned that the seventh victim had died. So we are still waiting to get updates on the conditions of the people who are in the hospital right now, Joshua.
Thank you, Dasha. That's NBC's Dasha Burns starting us off tonight from Highland Park, Illinois. Let's continue now with Kurt Braddock. He's an assistant professor of public communication at American University. His expertise is in communication related to extremism. Professor Braddock, welcome. Good to have you with us.
Good to be here, Joshua. Thank you very much.
I am amazed at how much we learned about the alleged shooter, Robert Crimo III, within hours of this shooting happening. NBC senior reporter Ben Collins was seemingly able to just sort of Google him and dig into the corners of the internet and discover a great deal about him. I don't know how deeply you have read into this man's history, but is there anything about him that stands out to you so far as it relates to what sense we may make of this shooting?
Well, it's still very, very early days yet. It's difficult to identify any kind of ideology that might have motivated what he did. Unfortunately, or fortunately for those that want to look into his history, it is rather easy to find some of these individuals online and look in retrospect to see, why didn't we see these kinds of warning signs? Why didn't we understand that somebody was planning this kind of attack? This particular individual seemed to leave a pretty obvious trail of breadcrumbs as to what he was planning. And unfortunately, although we have gotten better at monitoring these types of people, some slip through the cracks, and that seems to be the case here.
Talk about those trails of breadcrumbs. It seems like now the conversations we're having are more sophisticated as time has gone on, as it relates to understanding mass shooters and why they may have done what they did, insofar as we can understand them at all. What are some of the common bonds, the trends, the through lines that are starting to emerge in terms of how this kind of violence begins, gets its roots, gets inspired online?
Well, unfortunately, one of the common bonds between these kinds of shooters is that there very rarely are common psychological bonds. A lot of people like to explain it away in terms of mental illness, and sometimes that is the case. But there are so many different overlapping but disparate ideologies online right now that individuals can almost pick at them like a buffet. And this particular individual seems like that kind of person. We're just now learning about the kinds of dark corners of the internet that he spent time in. And it seems like in those times, in those corners, he picked different elements of different kinds of ideology, if we can even call it ideology at this point, and pulled together some kind of ideas from those dark corners. We talk about the 4chans, we talk about Gab, we talk about Parler, we talk about all these different kinds of things, but it seems as though he had been all over the place. And as we learn more about him, I think we'll learn about these different platforms he spent time on.
Well, and as it relates to platforms, I think we also have to, for people who may not be as versed in these platforms, we seem to have kind of evolved in terms of the nature of the problem, where you might have some platforms like a 4chan or an 8chan that tended to be more fertile ground for this kind of content. But now we also have to watch platforms like Telegram and Discord and others and Twitch that aren't necessarily specifically about anything you might consider extreme. They are just kind of means to an end. They're just places to drop content.
Absolutely. And that's one of the biggest difficulties, that a lot of these platforms are, on the face of them, very benign, like a Twitch, where individuals often just watch their favorite streamers play video games. But a lot of times these individuals slip through the cracks because of the content they are dropping into those platforms, and are very difficult to identify them on a case-by-case basis. on a place like a Gab or a Telegram where I know they're being used so individuals can communicate different elements of different ideologies. But it's very much on a case-by-case basis, and it's almost like playing whack-a-mole a lot of the time. And as I said, with some of these more benign platforms like a Twitch, it can be very difficult to pull somebody out and say, okay, this individual is showing problematic behavior, especially because a lot of the time they're using memes that have been co-opted and didn't have any kind of particular deviant meaning to them before they're co-opted.
I don't want people to be demonized online, especially young people who may have any array of mental health challenges, who much more would have a much more appropriate need for support and care than simply for enforcement and crackdown and suspicion. At the same time, I'm kind of worried that I don't know who in law enforcement is working Google on a daily basis. I mean, Ben Collins figured this out lickety-split. I appreciate the argument about good guys with guns. I'm worried where are the good guys with Google. Like, is anybody paying attention to sites like this, to channels like this, to try to prevent these attacks before they happen, especially for someone who had such voluminous material around the web?
Yeah, I can't speak for the law enforcement community, but in the research community, we absolutely are identifying some of these platforms and trying to dig into them to identify where these sorts of people are being cultivated. The difficulty is that certain symbols, certain ideas, certain ideologies, they change on almost a day-by-day basis. So I mentioned earlier playing whack-a-mole. It becomes a game where we try to identify the ideas before they really take hold and start spreading. If we can do that, if we can identify the kinds of ideas that might push somebody towards doing this kind of terrible attack before it's pervasive online, before it's co-opted by certain groups that would have somebody perform these attacks, then we can get ahead of the problem and actually engage with these individuals before they go on to do something violent. Something we don't want to do, as you said, we don't want to police ideas, and we don't want to take away from any kind of help that somebody might need. But it is important for us to recognize when these individuals are going down these pathways, and we can do that by identifying these ideas before they take hold.
Assistant Professor Kurt Braddock of American University, appreciate you making time for us tonight. Thank you very much.
Happy to. Thanks, Joshua.
Hey, before we move on from this story, I just want to note that we are keeping an eye on Highland Park, Illinois. We're told that Vice President Kamala Harris is on the ground there and will be visiting the area. She was in town to speak to the National Education Association, the National Teachers Union, which was meeting in Chicago. She was said to be heading there to Highland Park to speak to the mayor and local legislators there. We're keeping an eye on pictures of the arrival of the motorcade, and as soon as we have them, we will turn them around and bring them your way. But this was not the only place that gun violence affected the 4th. It interrupted festivities in more than a dozen U.S. cities yesterday, including Philadelphia. Authorities say that 2 police officers were shot during Philly's fireworks celebration. One officer was grazed on the forehead. Another was hit in the shoulder. Both have been treated and released from the hospital. That chaotic incident left a lot of people on edge, including Philadelphia's Mayor Jim Kenney. His remarks, for which he has since apologized, led some local officials and residents to demand his resignation.
I'm concerned every single day. There's not an event or a day where I don't lay on my back at night, look at the ceiling, and worry about stuff. So everything we have in the city over the last 7 years, I worry about. I don't enjoy 4th of July. I don't enjoy the Democratic National Convention. I didn't enjoy the NFL draft. I'm waiting for something bad to happen all the time. So I'll be happy when I'm not here, when I'm not mayor, and I can enjoy some stuff.
You're looking forward to not being mayor?
Yeah.
Joining us now is Daniel Webster. He is a professor at the Johns Hopkins Bloomberg School of Public Health. He teaches on violence prevention. Professor Webster, welcome. Good to have you with us.
Good to be with you.
I'd love your reaction to what Mayor Kenney said, that he's looking forward to not being mayor and not having to worry about these kinds of things. Violent crime is not universally up in all major cities. Some cities like Chicago have had some success in reducing violent crime, but it's hard not to empathize with Mayor Kenney.
Well, yes, he's been under a great deal of pressure. I understand why. The level of violence in Philadelphia has been extraordinarily high. I do think it's really worth noting that every city that is, there are many cities that are struggling with gun violence right now. And every local official in that kind of role is really under a great deal of pressure, and the blame is all directed at local officials. Some of that is understandable because there's things local officials can and should do, but it's really important to emphasize that we have a national problem. This is not a Philadelphia, only a Philadelphia problem. There are cities struggling with this problem throughout the country. So we have a national problem that really should be dealt with as a national problem.
I feel, though, Professor Webster, like the problem isn't viewed nationally. I think there are different kinds of conversations that go on when we talk about a place like Highland Park, Uvalde, Newtown, Littleton, Colorado, small town America, place where, we never would have thought something like this could happen here, as opposed to Philadelphia, right? Or Baltimore, or Chicago, or New York, where big city gun violence of this nature gets a very different reaction than idyllic small town gun violence. Are those two different reactions warranted, or should we view those two sets of problems a little more closely?
Well, look, it's undeniable, of course, that there are very different levels of gun violence across cities and towns across America. And again, it's not by accident. There are differences in public policies and structural conditions that create those huge disparities. To some degree, we have to recognize that there are unique situations in each locality that we should think about when we think about reducing gun violence. But I also think that we can sort of overemphasize the differences. When you break it down, what we're talking about is easy access of firearms to individuals with a violent past, with a violent and disturbing past. That is true in Philadelphia, it's true in Baltimore, it's true in Uvalde, it's true in Highland Park. So some of these things truly are a U.S. specific problem.
With that said, I wonder what you think of some of the...
Other countries do not
go ahead.
have this kind of problem.
Yes, and that's kind of why I wanted to ask you about some of the laws that have been passed recently, including the bipartisan Senate gun bill that was meant to curb gun violence in an array of different ways, including more support for mental health services. Also, New York State signed a package of gun legislation on Friday. New Jersey just signed a package of gun legislation today. What is your sense of some of these measures, whether or not they will get at the root causes of what's affecting gun violence right now, or maybe whether something different needs to be done?
Well, the Bipartisan Safer Communities Act at the federal level was a significant step forward. It wasn't anywhere near what we really need to do in terms of how far we need to go, because we have huge gaps in our gun laws now that enable guns to certainly to come into Chicago and other cities. But if you look carefully at New Jersey's laws and New York laws, they're pretty strict and comprehensive laws, and I think they go in the right direction. I think when we're thinking about mass shootings in particular, the resources to better implement red flag laws will translate into fewer gun deaths and fewer mass shootings, as well as fewer suicides. I think there are other important measures in that federal bill, directing resources to community violence intervention programs, and really important but under-discussed change in federal law to require more firearm sellers to actually become licensed dealers, and therefore they cannot sell guns without background checks, record keeping, and so forth. Right now, there are many people who sell a lot of guns not as licensed dealers, and they do not have background checks. So this was a step forward in background checks by appropriately changing the rules for who needs to get a license to sell a firearm?
Johns Hopkins professor Daniel Webster, I appreciate you talking us through this tonight. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Still to come, an update on abortion battles state by state. We'll consider how state bans affect the youngest patients. One recent case involves a 10-year-old rape victim. And later, protesters in Ohio want answers after a deadly police shooting. Body cam video shows a black man being shot dozens of times. We're glad you're with us tonight for Now Tonight from NBC News. The legal battles over abortion continue in a number of states. This morning, a judge temporarily blocked Florida's 15-week abortion ban. But hours after that order, the state appealed, and that appeal automatically put the ban back in effect. In Mississippi, a state court just denied a request to block its trigger law. That law takes effect this Thursday. It will ban abortion entirely in Mississippi. Ohio just put a 6-week abortion ban in place just hours after the Supreme Court's ruling on Roe v. Wade. That ban is in force tonight. Healthcare providers next door in Indiana, where abortion is legal, say they are seeing more patients from Ohio. Among them, a 10-year-old girl. She reportedly went to Indiana to terminate her pregnancy. She was 6 weeks along when Ohio's ban took effect. Let's focus now on Ohio with Dr. Tani Malhotra. She's an OBGYN based in Cleveland. Dr. Malhotra, welcome. Good to have you with us.
Thank you for having me.
Tell us what it's been like in Ohio these last few weeks since the Supreme Court's ruling. What has the mood been like among providers and patients? What's been going on?
The general mood has been a lot of fear and uncertainty. After Roe was reversed on June 24th at around 10 o'clock, by 6 p.m. that evening, the heartbeat bill in Ohio had gone into effect. Things just changed right in front of us, and we were wholly unprepared for what was to come. These laws are written by lawmakers and politicians who have no knowledge of medicine, or very limited knowledge, if at all. And they just don't take into consideration the nuances with which we make medical decisions on a day-to-day basis. And this makes it very hard for us to be able to take care of our patients.
I can only imagine what your thoughts are on this 10-year-old, as reported by the Indianapolis Star, who went from Ohio into Indiana to get abortion services. Talk about the unique medical considerations with someone who is so young. Again, reportedly, this was a 10-year-old who was a rape victim and then had a very difficult choice to make.
Yeah, a 10-year-old is a child. The body starts to get ready to ovulate and make eggs, but the body is not physically ready to carry a pregnancy. The hips have not widened. The nutritional status of that child is not at a place where it can sustain a pregnancy, which requires a lot of nutrition of its own. And not to mention, how can a 10-year-old ever consent to sex? So of course it's rape. And the laws that came into effect in Ohio make absolutely no exception for rape or incest. And so I am not surprised at all how quickly this came into the news, and this poor child who, after the child and their parent, after the trauma of having been raped, then to have to scramble to a different state to be able to get medically necessary and evidence-based care that should have been available to this child in Ohio.
Some lawmakers are calling on President Biden to declare a national emergency. Here's what Democratic Senator Richard Blumenthal of Connecticut said earlier today. Watch.
We're pressing President Biden to use whatever authority he has to the maximum extent to explore the possibility of a national emergency that would enable telemedicine prescriptions, which could then result in medication abortion through the mail.
Dr. Malhotra, what about that? I mean, I think about the case of this 10-year-old. Even if the child was able to get, abortion medications through telemedicine, there's still the matter of being a minor, and an adult still needs to be involved. It seems like the overturning of Roe opens up an array of details and questions that'll be different case by case. Are all of these questions new as a result of the overturning of Roe, or were some of these nuances things that you had to deal with even before that maybe we're just kind of noticing for the first time?
Most of them are new. However, people had considered for some time about telemedicine across state lines. I think it came to light specifically when COVID started and telemedicine visits were increasing. So some of that had been talked about, but how it impacts cross-state coverage, where one physician may be in a state where providing abortions is legal, providing that across state lines, how all of that affects our care is really not considered. And again, I'll kind of go back to the same thing. Like, we are physicians. We went to medical school, went to residency and fellowship, and have years of training in medicine, expertise in what we do, reproductive healthcare. The laws are not made by people who have that expertise. We don't have the expertise in making laws, and so we're not the right people to talk to about what is the best law to write or how should we write this law. We're certainly here to be able to consult with them, but we are the physicians. Our expertise is in being able to take care of our patients with medical problems, and lawmakers just don't have that expertise.
Briefly, before I have to let you go, how concerned are you for your ability to do your job? You tweeted today that you are wondering which of my evidence-based medical decisions may land me in jail. We are not okay. It sounds like you're a little concerned about your ability to just do your job from day to day.
We absolutely are. No other physician has to go to work and think, oh, I have to do an appendectomy, let me call the lawyer. We are now in a position where before we make decisions, particularly decisions where we're worried about the health of the mother, we have to make a call to the lawyer to make sure our medical decision-making, our sound, evidence-based, medically appropriate decision-making that before June 24th, I would have been able to make no problem, has to now be cleared by a lawyer. So we're worried. We're worried about our safety to be able to practice in these states, and we're worried about our patients and their safety and the delays in care that they will face while we're waiting to get approvals from our lawyers.
Dr. Tani Malhotra in Cleveland, I appreciate you making time to tell us your story tonight. Thank you very much.
Thank you for having me.
We will get to some of today's other top stories in a moment, including the investigation into a fatal police shooting in Akron, Ohio, a jailhouse letter from WNBA star Brittany Greiners to President Biden, and some of Britain's top lawmakers resigning out of distrust for Boris Johnson. Tonight's headlines begin in Akron, Ohio, where a 9 p.m. curfew remains in effect for one more night. The curfew came in response to protests over a deadly police shooting. Last night, protesters were peaceful but angry over the death of 25-year-old Jayland Walker. The night before was apparently not so orderly. Police say they arrested about 50 people on Sunday night. The demonstrations began after the release of body cam footage showing officers shooting Walker dead. We're not going to show the moment he is shot, but you still might find this video disturbing. It happened last Monday. Akron police say officers tried to pull Mr. Walker over for some kind of traffic violation. That is when he allegedly fired at them and led them on a high-speed chase. Officers then say that Jayland Walker got out of his car and ran. Akron's police chief says he was not armed when officers shot him. A gun and a bullet casing were later found back in the car. One key question in all of this: why so many shots were fired? According to the medical examiner, Jayland Walker had more than 60 wounds on his body. Joining us now is NBC News law enforcement analyst Carmen Best. She was formerly the police chief in Seattle, Washington. Chief Best, welcome. Good to see you again.
Thank you. I'm glad to be here.
what's your early read on this incident, with the understanding that we're early into the investigation and there are a lot of conflicting bits of information other than the body camera footage that we have? What's your early read on all this?
Well, you know, the chief and the administration there has a lot of work to do. Clearly, there'll be a very thorough investigation. Most pursuit policies in most organizations, including in Akron, Ohio, are 2-officer pursuits with a supervisor that would allow for more officers to be involved in the pursuit. In this case, it's not clear, but if there was a supervisor involved, or if that supervisor authorized more vehicles to be engaged in the pursuit. So they're going to have to figure out whether their own policy was followed in that regard. Additionally, the shots fired, the numerous shots fired, one of the key components to uses of force, especially deadly use of force, is you really have to modulate and moderate your use of force based on the threat that you have in front of you. So the fact that this was an unarmed African-American male, they're going to have to dig and figure out why, and in fact, if people didn't or did modulate their force accordingly. It's certainly at first blush is a lot of shots, so it's an issue.
Yeah, with regard to that, I was just going to ask you, in terms of what officers are trained to do, and training is a little different in different departments, granted, but I'm trying to think through the use case in which an internal affairs investigator, a civilian police review board might look at something like this and go, yeah, all 90 of those bullets were absolutely justified. Talk through that. Like, what does it take for that kind of an overwhelming use of force on one unarmed suspect to be considered justifiable?
Yeah, I can't really speak for, what the outcome will be, but they're certainly going to be looking at just what I talked about. What was the threat or the level of threat that the officers were addressing when they were firing those rounds downrange? And also the fact that at least one of the officers, it sounds like, called for people to cease fire. This could be a number of things that they'll have to consider about why they continued shooting, whether it was a contagious shooting situation, or if in fact the perceived threat to the officers warranted that number of shots. I'll tell you, at first blush, from my opinion, it certainly is a lot of shots, an excessive number of shots. But we'll wait for the investigators to see if in fact there's something different. Clearly, in the court of public opinion, it was too much, and I think that they'll have to take a look at each individual officer and what they perceived and how many rounds they fired.
What about the city's response to the public outcry? How would you assess the way that Akron has handled all this, including the release of the body cam footage?
Well, I think it's critically important that the body camera footage be released sooner rather than later. We all know, as in the case of Laquan McDonald in Chicago and other cases, that withholding that information, it just shows a lack of transparency. It's not going to change the outcome, and you'd rather have all the information as readily available as possible and deal with whatever the result of that is. I think that kudos to the department for being transparent, to the chief for providing, accurate and transparent information, and then an independent organization will do the review, and the facts will lead them to the truth.
Before I have to let you go, how do you think we're doing in general in terms of handling these kinds of situations? It's sad to say, but it's happened so much lately. There's almost a playbook, right? There's a post that goes up on social media. It starts to catch fire. Then larger outlets get wind of it. There's a protest. There's a call for body cam footage. There's an investigation. There are calls to defund the police. It feels like we've gotten into kind of a rhythm with some of these incidents now, for lack of a better term. Are we getting better at dealing with these police-involved shootings at all? Like, are we making any progress as you see it?
I think there is some progress. Just the fact that I know it seems very repetitive to have these discussions, But we have to have these discussions. We have to show what happened. We have to develop policy and procedure and training that allows us to have better outcomes whenever possible. And so while it's uncomfortable, while yes, it's tiring, while many feel road weary, if we're not paying attention and having these discussions, hopefully peacefully, then we're not going to be able to improve the situation. So that has to occur.
NBC News law enforcement analyst Carmen Best. Chief, good to see you. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
WNBA star Brittany Griner is asking President Biden to help end her detention in Russia. She hand-wrote him a letter expressing her terror at the prospect of being stuck in a Russian prison forever. It reads in part, quote, "I realize you are dealing with so much, but please don't forget about me and the other American detainees. Please do all you can to bring us home. I still have so much good to do with my freedom that you can help restore," unquote. This morning, Mrs. Griner's wife, Sherelle, explained why she wanted to reach out to President Biden directly.
I think the decision for her to feel the need to directly reach out to President Biden is because of the failed attempts that we have had as a family. You know, she's there and she knows that we are doing everything that we can in our own strength to, you know, ask to meet with the president and to, you know, request that, you know, they do everything they can to get her home. And it kills me every time that, you know, when I have to write her and she's asking, you know, have you met with him yet? And, you know, I have to say no.
In a statement, the White House said that the U.S. government is doing all it can to bring Brittany Griner home. Her trial began in Moscow on Friday. A special grand jury in Atlanta is investigating possible election interference in Georgia. Now, it's subpoenaed a number of people close to former President Trump. Among them, South Carolina Republican Senator Lindsey Graham. He called Georgia's Secretary of State Brad Raffensperger after the election. Senator Graham denies doing anything wrong. Also subpoenaed, Rudy Giuliani, a former personal attorney to the president, as well as lawyers and podcasters who worked with Mr. Trump after the election. The special grand jury convened this year. It's looking into whether there were coordinated attempts to change Georgia's election results. Meanwhile, the investigation into the attack on the Capitol will continue, now with another public hearing. Today, the January 6th committee announced its next hearing, next Tuesday, July 12th. That's the day the House returns from a 2-week recess. British Prime Minister Boris Johnson is dealing with yet another political scandal. This one prompted a wave of resignations today, including 2 cabinet members. At issue is a sexual misconduct scandal involving Chris Pincher, a member of Parliament and a member of the Prime Minister's Conservative Party. Last week, Mr. Pincher resigned over complaints of inappropriate behavior. Prime Minister Johnson had promoted Pincher to a powerful legislative role. His office had claimed that he knew nothing about these allegations. In the last few days, they've had to walk that back. And today, 2 cabinet members resigned in protest. The Secretary of State for Health and Social Care, Sajid Javid, and the Chancellor of the Exchequer, Rishi Sunak. That second one, the Chancellor, that's a big one. That's basically like the U.S. Treasury Secretary. He's the most senior politician behind the Prime Minister. Mr. Sunak wrote in his resignation letter that, quote, "The public rightly expect government to be conducted properly, competently, and seriously," unquote. And Mr. Javid wrote, quote, "I can no longer continue in good conscience," unquote. In response to the scandal, the Prime Minister said, quote, "I apologize to everybody who has been badly affected by it. I want to make absolutely clear that there's no place in this government for anybody who is predatory or who abuses their position of power," unquote. Coming up, the Supreme Court's overturning of Roe v. Wade could impact maternal mortality. We'll explain when we come back. We do not yet know all the ramifications of overturning Roe v. Wade, but a new study suggests a link between access to abortion and maternal mortality rates. According to research from the University of Colorado, a nationwide abortion ban could increase maternal deaths as much as 24%. For Black women, researchers estimate the increase at 39%. Maternal mortality rates vary state by state, but if the 26 states that have already banned or plan to ban abortion had not performed the procedure in 2020, researchers found there might have been as many as 64 more maternal deaths. Joining us now is Amanda Stevenson. She's an assistant professor of sociology at the University of Colorado Boulder, and she is also the study's lead author. Professor Stevenson, welcome. Good to have you with us.
Thank you for having me.
I don't want to put too fine a point on your study, so please tell me if I'm dealing in hyperbole or generalities. I want to make sure we get this right. But it sounds like the upshot of the study is to try to explain how abortion services can literally save women's lives, how there's a direct link between the mortality of the mother and her ability to abort a pregnancy under an array of different circumstances. But that sounds like kind of the upshot of the study. Do I have that right? Am I missing anything?
No, it's basically just arithmetic. Staying pregnant is far, far deadlier than having an abortion. And so every time someone is prevented from having an abortion that they want, they're exposed to a much greater risk of dying than they would have been if they had had the abortion. So it's just math.
Explain that if you would. What is it? And I know this sounds like a very facile question, but I think we're learning there are some things about pregnancy and maternal mortality that some folks just don't know. What is it about pregnancy that makes it so much deadlier when abortion is not an option? Can you elaborate on that?
Well, so in the study, all we did was take the number of abortions and estimate how many of the pregnancies that would have ended in abortion would instead end in birth if abortion were not available, and then applied maternal mortality rates as they currently exist to those births. So that is just saying, imagine nobody could get abortions and pregnancy stayed exactly as dangerous as it is right now. And unfortunately, the truth is people who have abortions are systematically less advantaged than people who have births. And so the people who have abortions who would be forced to stay pregnant, if they weren't allowed to have abortions, would have higher risks of dying, not the same risks of dying as the people who have births. And so the estimates that we have are very conservative, which means they're lower than we would actually expect in reality.
Zooming out a little bit from this study, why is maternal mortality so high in the U.S.? I mean, compared to other nations, the mortality rate, I mean, you can see at the top of the chart, it's kind of incredible. About 24 deaths per 100,000 live births in the U.S., which as an absolute number is very small, but France, it's fewer than 9. Canada, it's fewer than 9. The U.K., fewer than 7. Germany, it's about 3. New Zealand, it's fewer than 2. Why is maternal mortality so very high in the United States?
So this is a very difficult question. It doesn't have a simple answer. The truth is that the United States fares very poorly on indicators of health when compared with other rich nations. And this is, just like our life expectancy is lower than other rich nations. We lose more pregnant people than other rich nations too. But maternal deaths are mostly preventable. So this is an indictment on our society. People shouldn't die because they're pregnant. Those lower rates that we see in other rich countries, we could have rates like those if we took care of pregnant people the way that they do in other rich places. So this is about healthcare, but it's not just about healthcare. It's about underlying health conditions. Do people have access to safe and healthy communities, good access to quality, not stressful lives and so forth? Like, it's hard to be disadvantaged in America in a way that is really stressful. And this is especially true because of the legacy of racism in this country. When people used to ask me this question when I was much younger, I would just literally answer, well, racism. There's more to it than just potentially racism, but the truth is that racism is a fundamental cause of many of the inequities that we witness. And the rates of maternal death are higher for all race ethnicities than they should be, but they're much higher for Black people, much, much higher.
Before I have to let you go, you kind of hinted at this, but I know Vice President Harris spoke at the Essence Festival a few days ago and said that the Biden administration is trying to address maternal mortality. Is there anything that you think should be at the top of their list?
Yeah, so there are a number of researchers that have been working in this area, as well as activist groups. The National Birth Equity Collective, Rachel Hardiman, Monica McLemore, and other scholars have established a sort of a toolkit for advancing better health outcomes for Black women in particular. And they've made it very easy. I know that they're working with leadership, but they've laid out exactly what needs to happen. And it's a lot of stuff. It's not a small lift because our country is truly unequal, and it's that inequality that generates these tragic statistics.
Professor Amanda Stevenson from UC Boulder, appreciate you breaking down your research for us. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much.
A big change is coming to the Big Ten. We will tell you which schools are changing conferences in college football and why before we go. College football is about to make a big change. Two of the most storied schools in college athletics, on the West Coast anyway, are switching conferences. In 2024, the Big Ten Conference will have two new members, the University of Southern California and UCLA. The Trojans and the Bruins are coming from the Pac-12 Conference on the West Coast. But Big Ten campuses are, as you can see, mostly in the Midwest and Mid-Atlantic. So why the move? Let's discuss with Ross Dellinger. He's a college football writer for Sports Illustrated. Mr. Dellinger, welcome. Good to have you with us.
Good to be on.
How big of a deal do you feel that this is? We're not talking about, say, the University of Alabama moving conferences, right? Like a school that wins championships every few years. We're talking about some schools in the Pac-12 who haven't really been powerhouses when it comes to the race for the championship. Let's be honest. How big a deal is this move?
Well, from a historical, I guess, point of view, it is pretty significant that you have two of kind of the founding members with big name brands in a huge metro, right, in Los Angeles, leaving a conference that that has won the most national championships when you include Olympic sports of any conference in the nation. So, and the Pac-12 calls itself the Conference of Champions, and they just lost, probably two of their three proudest members, maybe, and maybe their top most richest, proudest member in USC, and they lost that Los Angeles market, or at least they lost their two teams from their biggest market in Los Angeles. So it's pretty significant when you look at that side of it. And when you also look at, as the map is showing there, right, geographically and maybe culturally, this doesn't make any sense. And the fact that it still happened should tell you where we are in college football and college sports right now. And that's where we are is big dollars, and the big money moves decisions, even if they are geographic. It doesn't make sense, right? Even if some of them don't make sense, money moves these decisions.
Well, with that, Martin Jarman, who's UCLA's athletic director, told the LA Times that UCLA's athletic department was in his words, significant debt before it decided to change conferences. And it's possible that if there's a new TV deal negotiated with the Big Ten that could bring big money, that would provide a payout to UCLA and USC, that would allow them to continue some of those programs that have created Olympic medalists. So should we be viewing this mostly through a money lens, or is there even more to it than just money?
Well, there is more to it than money, but I think 90 to 95% of this is probably, you could say, a money decision. And as Martin Jarman said, UCLA was struggling budget-wise, and I think they probably, like a lot of schools nationally, were contemplating or at least exploring cutting some Olympic sports because most of them lose money. Some of them lose millions of dollars a year, and they're funded by football. And you get in a better football conference that brings in more money, well, you can fund those programs, and that's where they're heading. You know, the Big Ten is probably heading toward a media rights deal that's maybe over $1 billion. And so distributed to its teams every year, that's a good chunk of change, double, if not triple, what the Pac-12 distributes to its programs. So the annual distribution of TV money is going to be the determining factor in a lot of these conference moves.
And very briefly, Ross, in our last few seconds, what does this mean for the Pac-12 schools that are left behind?
Well, they're scrambling. They've got to do something, and it's probably one or the other. Either the Pac-12 get some replacement teams, or they do some kind of merger or partnership with another conference. But some way they've got to fill the hole, and a very big one left by USC and UCLA. Either way, they're going to probably see a decrease again in their TV money because of this, and maybe that means other schools in the Pac-12 leave.
Yeah. Ross Dellinger of Sports Illustrated, appreciate you making time for us tonight. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
And thank you for making time for us as well. Until we meet again, I'm Joshua Johnson. We'll see you tomorrow. Good night.
Thanks for watching our YouTube channel. Follow today's top stories and breaking news by downloading the NBC News app.